The big news out of Washington today, which was, of course, the highly anticipated congressional hearings over the BP oil spill. A disaster of a spill that continues to paralyze the Gulf of Mexico, going on 3 weeks now. The thing that happens after disasters like this, and after every bad thing that happens, really, is that those in the position of authority try to figure out what went wrong. Who's to blame? If you crash your car into someone and the cops show up, they want to know whose fault it was. In this case, if you spill the biggest amount of oil into the ocean over 20 years, the question on the table for Congress is, whose fault was it? Who's to blame? Today, we were supposed to get answers to those questions. But if you've been paying attention for the last 10 years, heck, if you've been paying attention for the last 100 years, you know it's never quite that easy. What we got today was not so much answers, but rather the buck stops over there blame gaming. The Gilded Age version of this, which I love, back when corruption was quaint, was summed up nicely in this iconic cartoon by Thomas Nast. See, the caption on the bottom, who stole the people's money? And then it's this big circle of people pointing to the guy next to him. Nobody willing to take responsibility. 100 years later, this blame the other guy strategy is known on the internet as the Shaggy defense. It's named after a classic song called It Wasn't Me, a woeful tale of a man caught in flagrante having an affair, and his subsequent advice about how to get out of it.
You saw the marks on my shoulder. Wasn't me. Heard the words that I told her. Wasn't me. Heard the screams getting louder. Wasn't me. She stayed until it was over.
Yes, it wasn't me, a timeless chronicle of moral culpability and the perils of excuse-making. Over the last 10 years, this miserable decade of failure after failure, every time there's supposed to be a reckoning. The Shaggy defense is what we get from people in charge. It wasn't me. Nobody is ever to blame for anything anymore. Every time institutional failure happens, it wasn't me. On the Iraq War, for example, George Bush made an art form out of pulling out the Shaggy defense.
The intelligence failure in Iraq. A lot of people put their reputations on the line. Said, the weapons of mass destruction was a reason to remove Saddam Hussein. It wasn't just people in my administration.
I think it was just bad analysis. And it wasn't just our CIA. It was intelligence services all over the world that believed the same thing.
Wasn't me. It was the intelligence agencies, and not just ours, everyone else's. Brilliant use of the Shaggy defense. Top notch, really. After Hurricane Katrina, those who headed up the failed response effort, they didn't hesitate. They went right for the Shaggy defense.
Mr. Chairman, it's my belief that FEMA did a good job in the Gulf states. I very strongly, personally regret that I was unable to persuade Governor Blanco and Mayor Nagin to sit down, get over their differences, and work together.
What was mobilized? I mean, were National Guard troops in position? Were helicopters standing by? Were buses ready to take people away?
No, none of that.
None of that?
None of that.
Why is that?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a question for somebody else.
Yeah, that's a question for somebody else. Don't look at me. Don't look at me. More recently, in the wake of this big financial crisis, Wall Street executives at firms like Goldman Sachs have sort of perfected the Shaggy defense.
We did not cause the financial crisis. I do not think that we did anything wrong.
Regret to me means something that you feel like you did wrong. And I don't have that.
Boom. Shaggy defense. It wasn't them. There's this well-worn pattern in this country of our elites passing the buck to someone else when disaster strikes. So, what do you think happened today in Congress when the question of who's to blame for the Gulf oil spill came up? Well, to set the stage, here are your options. The blame lies with either BP, who operated the oil well, Transocean, who owned the oil rig, or Halliburton, who was doing the work on the oil well at the time. So here we go. BP, you're up first. You operated the well that's now leaking out of control, so that's your bad, right?
BP, as a leaseholder and the operator of the well, hired Transocean to drill that well. Transocean, as owner and operator of the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig, had responsibility for the safety of drilling operations.
Well played, sir. It wasn't you, it was Transocean. All right, Transocean, your move. You own the rig, so must be your fault, right?
Liability and culpability and ultimate responsibility for the events that resulted in the incident are one thing. As the lease operator and the well owner, that falls on BP.
Touché. Transocean puts it right back on BP. The Shaggy defense in all of its glory, mutually assured Shaggy defense. Anything else you want to add to that, Transocean?
The one thing we do know is that on the evening of April 20th, there was a sudden catastrophic failure of the cement, the casing, or both. Without a failure of one of those elements, the explosion could not have occurred.
Aha, new player. Well, Halliburton were the ones doing the cement work at the time, so it looks like they're to blame. Halliburton, what do you have to say for yourself?
I need to emphasize that Halliburton, as a service provider to the well owner, is contractually bound to comply with the well owner's instructions on all matters relating to the performance of all work-related activities.
Hear that? The well owner, which would get us right back to BP. Shoot, I was kind of guessing it would in the end be Halliburton to blame. I mean, isn't that the default reaction in most terrible situations since about 2003? Instead, it was BP, Transocean, and Halliburton all shifting the blame, all giving their own version of the Shaggy defense. And given this country's recent history, that wasn't necessarily surprising. That's what people in charge do in post-disaster situations like this. But it doesn't really help us get any closer to understanding what went wrong here. And if everyone is to blame, then no one is to blame. And that means there's little incentive for Halliburton or Transocean or BP to make sure this never happens again. Joining us now is Democratic Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey. He's a member of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, where those oil executives testified today. Senator Menendez, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good to be with you.
Watching these hearings on TV, it certainly seemed like these executives were just shifting the blame back and forth. Is that how it seemed to you in the room?
Well, absolutely. I said in my first line of questioning that I can see we have the liability circle working already, and no one wants to be responsible, which is why my legislation to raise the individual liability from $75 million to $10 billion is essential so that they can't run away individually or collectively from their responsibility to the fishermen, to the shrimp fishermen, to the commercial fishermen, to the coastal communities, to the estuaries that are going to be harmed. That's why we need to do this, because as they play the blame game, we want to make sure that people are made whole.
Well, explain that. So if you raise the cap through this legislation, the idea is that there's so much liability to go around, we can kind of spread it to all the parties? Is that the idea?
Well, right now, for example, BP has only a $75 million liability. That's beyond the clean, of course. They'll have to clean up. But when commercial fishermen are harmed, when shrimp fishermen are harmed, when seafood processing plants are harmed, when those coastal communities lose tourism, and on and on and on, their liability is $75 million. That's ridiculous. So we want to raise that to $10 billion. And considering that BP made $5.6 billion in profits, not proceeds, profits, in the first 3 months of this year alone, I think they can afford to pay it.
Given everything you did here today and with all the kind of blame shifting that was going on, were you able to discern who actually is most responsible at this point? I mean, of the three parties you had in front of you, is there a clear villain here?
Well, I don't think we were able to deduce that today, and we're certainly going to need, once the cleanup, once the oil spill is contained and the cleanup moves on, and then we're going to have a full investigation. But it seems to me, personally, that there is plenty of liability across the entire spectrum of that table. And it also seems to me that we have to question our federal inspection standards as to how it is that the blowout protector, which was supposed to stop this all from happening and had about a dozen different safeguards, none of which worked, ultimately could possibly be in a situation in which none of them could work. How were they tested, under what standards, to make sure that that would have never been possible? So I think there's plenty to go around here, but above all, I just don't want, while BP chases Transocean, which chases Halliburton, for the people in the Gulf region to have to wait. That's why raising the liability standards would make those people whole right away, instead of what we saw in Exxon Valdez, where people had to wait 20 years. Many of them got nothing because they just fell off the process, the legal process along the way. I don't want to see that happen here. And it's also a lesson to these companies that they're going to have to really rein in the essence of what they're doing. And it makes us think twice about drilling offshore. I hope we understand there's no such thing as too safe not to fail.
You know, you mentioned offshore drilling, and obviously the White House made quite a bit out of coming out in support of offshore drilling, and the timing of this has happened just in the wake of that announcement. Do you think this is an embarrassment for the administration that seemed to stake a lot of political capital on opening up the oceans for drilling?
Well, I think the administration made a huge mistake here. As someone who represents the state of New Jersey and knows a lot of my colleagues along the coastal states, we have multi-billion-dollar economies built on tourism,